There is a moment that almost no one sees. No applause, no visible shift, no announcement. And yet something irreversible happens inside you. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It is a quiet decision that alters your trajectory before the world has any evidence. Winning begins there. Not publicly, not in results, not in recognition. It begins in the private refusal to continue living the same way. The shift happens when you stop tolerating what once felt acceptable, when the excuses lose their comfort, when the old standards feel tight around your identity. That moment does not look like success. It often looks like dissatisfaction, restlessness, a subtle internal rebellion. The real shift is internal and structural. It is the elevation of your standards before your circumstances rise to meet them. And that elevation can feel almost invisible. You wake up and something feels different, but nothing has changed externally. The job is the same. The environment is the same. The people around you are the same, but your tolerance has shifted. Early progress rarely announces itself. It hides in thought patterns, in what you no longer justify, in what you no longer entertain, in the boundaries you imagine before you speak them. These are quiet wins. They do not create immediate outcomes. They create direction. The win started the moment you stopped tolerating the old version of your life. Before visible success, there is often collapse. Something breaks. A relationship ends. A plan fails. A structure you relied on dissolves. In the moment, it feels like regression, like loss, like evidence that you miscalculated. But psychologically, collapse often marks the point where your previous identity reached its limit. There is a personal threshold everyone hits, a moment where the existing structure can no longer hold the internal growth that has already begun. When that threshold is crossed, tension increases, frustration builds. Eventually something gives, and when it does, it can feel like falling. But falling is not always downward. Sometimes it is structural clearing. Endings create leverage. They remove the illusion that you can continue as before. They compress you into honesty. When the familiar collapses, you are forced to see what was unsustainable. That clarity is uncomfortable. Discomfort often precedes upward movement because the system must destabilize before it reorganizes. The breakdown was not regression. It was repositioning. What once felt stable may have actually been limiting. What felt like security may have been stagnation. Collapse strips away the surface layer and reveals the architecture underneath. And once you see the architecture clearly, you cannot unsee it. Then something else begins to shift. You start caring less about what used to consume you. Not in a bitter way, not in apathy, more like neutrality. The things that once triggered you lose intensity. Conversations that used to drain you feel distant. Opinions that once defined your mood no longer grip you the same way. Detachment is often the first sign of momentum. When emotional reactivity decreases, clarity increases. The nervous system stabilizes. You are less pulled by external stimuli, less reactive to praise or criticism. Silence appears before acceleration. It can feel like nothing is happening. But internally, the reduction of chaos is significant progress. Emotional neutrality is not numbness. It is regulation. It is the nervous system recalibrating after long periods of overstimulation. And in that quiet, something organizes itself. You begin to see patterns more clearly. You notice what aligns and what does not. You respond rather than react. The win begins when the old life stops having emotional control over you. This internal shift precedes any visible change. Identity transforms before outcomes follow. Self-concept upgrades silently. You begin to think differently about who you are, not in exaggerated affirmations, but in subtle assumptions. You assume you deserve more. You assume you can handle more. You assume certain behaviors are no longer acceptable. Small decisions start reflecting this change. You decline invitations that drain you. You invest time differently. You speak more directly. You rest without guilt. None of these decisions are dramatic alone, but collectively they signal a redefinition. When identity shifts, returning to old standards feels impossible. You may try briefly. You may revisit old habits, but they feel foreign, misaligned. Your nervous system reacts differently. There is friction where there used to be comfort. You are already winning because you are no longer operating as who you were. And yet this phase can be confusing because externally it may look like nothing is happening. No major breakthrough. no public milestone. The quiet phase can feel like stagnation. This is where many people retreat. They mistake invisibility for inactivity. Invisible progress feels like stillness, but internally, neural patterns are reorganizing. The brain updates through repetition. Small, consistent shifts compound before they become visible. Just because there is no external proof does not mean there is no internal construction. The danger is quitting during the quiet phase. Doubt increases when evidence is delayed. The mind searches for reassurance. It wants confirmation that the effort is working. But early momentum often leaves no visible trace. It is structural, foundational. Patience stabilizes breakthroughs. Without patience, you interrupt the process before it crystallizes. An interruption resets momentum. Just because it is not visible does not mean it is not active. There is also a reason this message resonates now. Psychological readiness determines what lands. You may have encountered similar ideas before and dismissed them, but something in you has shifted. The unconscious recognizes alignment before the conscious mind articulates it. Timing feels intentional, not because of magic, but because of readiness. When internal standards rise, certain messages penetrate differently. They feel less like advice and more like confirmation. If this resonates, it is not coincidence. It reflects a stage you have reached, a threshold crossed quietly. You are at the point where it makes sense. The only way to lose from here is regression, not external failure, not temporary setbacks. Regression means returning to expired standards, convincing yourself that the old tolerance was acceptable, mistaking discomfort for failure, and retreating into what once felt safe. Discomfort during growth is not evidence of error. It is evidence of expansion. The nervous system recalibrates when identity evolves. There may be moments of uncertainty, moments of fatigue, but these are transitional states, not verdicts. Overforcing is another subtle trap. Trying to accelerate the process aggressively can destabilize it. Growth is not linear. It consolidates. It integrates. Allowing recalibration is different from passivity. It is trusting that internal restructuring is occurring even when it is not dramatic. You are not at the beginning. You are in the middle of a quiet upgrade. The wind has already started. It began the moment your standards changed. It continued through the collapse that cleared space. It strengthened through detachment. It deepened through identity shift. It stabilized during invisibility. Your only task is not to interrupt it, not by returning to what you outgrew, not by demanding premature proof, not by interpreting temporary discomfort as defeat. Momentum is already present. It may be silent, it may be subtle, but it is real. And if you stay aligned with the version of yourself that no longer tolerates the old patterns, external evidence will eventually reflect the internal shift. Winning began before anyone noticed, including you. And this is where it becomes even more subtle. After the internal standards rise, after the collapse clears space, after detachment begins to stabilize you, there is a phase that feels almost anticlimactic. No dramatic breakthrough, no immediate validation, just a quiet recalibration of how you move through ordinary days. You wake up and the world looks the same, but your reactions are not. The conversations that once drained you no longer hook you in the same way. You notice yourself pausing before responding, choosing words more deliberately, walking away from dynamics that once felt compulsory. These are not visible victories. They are internal realignments. This is how identity shifts, consolidate. A self-concept does not upgrade through grand declarations. It upgrades through repetition of small, consistent behaviors that match a new standard. The brain adapts to what you repeatedly do, not what you briefly feel inspired by. Each small decision becomes evidence, and evidence reshapes belief. You start to trust yourself in micro moments. You say no without over-explaining. You choose rest without guilt. You stop chasing validation from people who are no longer aligned with who you are becoming. None of this looks impressive from the outside, but internally, it is structural reinforcement. There is something powerful about reduced reactivity. When the old life stops having emotional control over you, you gain leverage. Leverage over your time, over your attention, over your internal state. The nervous system is not constantly bracing. It is not scanning for threat in every interaction. It begins to settle. Silence before acceleration can feel deceptive. The mind may interpret it as stagnation, but silence is often integration. The system reorganizing energy that was once scattered is consolidating. This consolidation is not loud. It is steady. Invisible progress is the most fragile stage because it offers no applause, no external confirmation. Doubt can intensify here. You may question whether anything meaningful is actually happening. You may compare your quiet transformation to someone else's visible milestone and feel behind. But visible milestones are late indicators. They are the result of long internal alignment. By the time something is public, it has already been rehearsed internally many times. The danger is abandoning the process during this quiet consolidation, interpreting the absence of external proof as absence of progress, when in reality, foundations are strengthening. There is a psychological pattern that often appears right before external proof surfaces. Doubt increases. The mind becomes louder. It tries to protect you from potential disappointment by lowering expectations. This does not mean you are off track. It often means you are close to tangible feedback. Growth destabilizes certainty, and certainty is what the mind craves. The question is not whether discomfort appears. It will. The question is whether you interpret discomfort as evidence of failure or as evidence of expansion. Returning to expired standards is the only true regression. Not failing at a new attempt, not adjusting direction. Regression happens when you consciously lower your internal bar to avoid the tension of growth. When you convince yourself that what once felt insufficient is suddenly acceptable again. It is tempting. The old patterns are familiar. They require less energy. They ask less of you. But they also confine you to a smaller version of yourself. Overforcing can be another subtle interruption. Trying to manufacture dramatic change to prove that you are progressing. Forcing visibility. Forcing results. This often creates unnecessary strain. Growth that is forced tends to destabilize because it bypasses integration. There is strength in allowing recalibration, in understanding that internal restructuring precedes external shift, in recognizing that momentum can be present even when it is quiet. You may notice that your tolerance for certain conversations has permanently decreased, that your patience for misalignment is thinner, that your standards for your own behavior have risen. This is not arrogance. It is refinement. You cannot return fully to who you were because you have already seen beyond that version. Awareness makes regression uncomfortable. The old dynamics no longer fit cleanly. This is how you know the win has already started. Winning is not a single event. It is a sequence of internal alignments that accumulate. The silent decision, the collapse that forced clarity, the detachment that reduced reactivity, the identity shift reflected in small choices, the patience during invisibility. Each stage builds on the previous one. And here's the quiet recognition that stabilizes everything. Nothing is missing right now. There is no urgent step you are failing to take. The process is unfolding through your daily behavior, through what you tolerate and what you no longer tolerate, through how you respond to discomfort. If you are in this phase right now, comment "integrating" below, not for validation, but as a declaration that you refuse to regress. Your only real risk is interrupting this unfolding by doubting it into submission. The mind will attempt to reassert control. It will ask for timelines, for guarantees, for visible evidence. It will compare, it will analyze. But the deeper shift does not operate on immediate proof. It operates on consistency. Trusting the process does not mean passivity. It means staying aligned with the new standard, even when no one is watching. Especially then. There is a quiet maturity in recognizing that acceleration follows integration, that external wins are reflections, not causes, that the true victory was internal and already occurred. If this message feels precise, it is because you are in the phase where precision matters. Not hype, not dramatic transformation stories. Precision, refinement, subtle alignment. You are not at the beginning. You are in motion, even if the motion is invisible. And the only way to lose from here is to pretend that you have not changed. The win has already started. Your only responsibility now is not to interrupt it.